Super. Hi, everyone. I'd like to call to order the ACSD School Board meeting of Monday, January 11th, 2001. And at this time, we'd like to do introductions. We've got a lot of folks in the participant presenter category, so I'll just try to call out your name based upon what I see on the screen. And if I miss somebody, please let me know. We'll start off with you, Chip. If everyone could just unmute now and then we'll roll through.
Chip Malcolm.
Great. Suzanne? Peter?
Peter Conlon.
Will?
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Jory?
Jory Jacobite.
Davina?
Davina Damaray.
Jen?
Jen Newceder.
Victoria?
Victoria Jetty.
Lorraine?
Lorraine Morse.
Makala?
Michaela Wizzle, Assistant Principal at Mary Hogan.
Tracy?
Tracy Harrington, Ripton Principal.
Amy?
Amy McGlashan.
Jen? Kay?
Jen Kravitz, Principal at Mary Hogan.
Vicky?
Vicki Wells, Director of Student Services.
Justin?
Justin Campbell, High School Principal.
Brittany?
Brittany Gilman, Business Manager.
Andrew?
Hello, Andrew Conforti, Interim Principal at MUMS.
Henry?
Henry Carpenter, Student Representative.
Laura?
Laura Kiefer, Interim Assistant Principal at MUMS.
Nicole?
Nicole Carter, Principal, Weybridge Elementary School.
Betty?
Betty Kafumbe.
Kathy?
Kathy Deeman, High School Assistant Principal.
Heather?
Heather Robb, Principal at Cornwall.
Peter?
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
Caitlin?
Lynn Steele, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Matthew?
Matthew Brankman, Principal in Bridport.
And Michael.
Michael Lennox, Principal at Shoreham Elementary.
Perfect. Thank you. As always, we reserve this time for public comment. If you could raise your Zoom hand, and then Peter will bring you over into the panelist category.
Cheryl Cesario's over.
Okay. I noticed this meeting and also the last one, you seem to have stopped reading who is in attendance behind the scenes because we can't see each other. And there was a couple meetings where you read off who is there, and I don't know why that has stopped. I'm on a town committee, and we don't do the meetings this way at all, that we actually can see everyone from the public. They don't have to be able to speak, but we at least can see the names of the people. And that's, from my understanding, according to Vermont open meeting law. So I don't know if you're not subject to that, but it just seems like you, for like a common courtesy, should be reading off who's in attendance. Thank you.
Cheryl, that's my fault. I didn't ask for that last time, and I apologize, and we'll make sure to ask Peter to do that again. So that's my fault.
Great, thanks.
Do you want me to do that now?
Sure, that would be great, Peter. Thanks.
Okay. We have 84YCK, Amy Clapp, Barb Wilson, Dana Robinson, Dee Bertholf, Heidi Schmidt, Hugh McLaughlin, Jenny Phelps, John Wetzel, Joreen Doria, Mary Heather Noble, MCTV, Molly Kerr, Perry Hansen, Ruth, Stacy Rainey, Tanya Scuteri, Tina Wright, and Wendy Harlan.
Thank you, Peter.
Tina Wright.
Am I unmuted?
You're all set, Tina. Yep.
Super, thank you. My public comment tonight is surrounded around the term equity. And as we all know, we're often speaking of equity for our students, but I would like to speak behalf on our communities, because I believe that we're not being equitable in communicating board meetings such as this. I do understand that you do the posting perhaps on the school doors. I'm assuming that's happening. I'm not going into a school building, so I'm not seeing that myself. But I feel, as I've previously mentioned, that we're missing the mark with the most vulnerable families and students throughout our communities. And I'll circle back to communication systems that we have. And my question is, has the board considered, especially that we're in a pandemic, and we're talking about some pretty heavy items, the school closures, has the board considered additional communications out to these families, specifically in the communities that their schools will be closing, but overall the entire school community? In a brief summary, I questioned 15 families in a community where their school is closing, and 10 of them had no idea their school was closing. And that is alarming. And one of the distribution methods that could be used going forward is as simple as stuffing the backpack for the students that are in person. Or I know some of the principals do wonderful weekly newsletters, but what I feel is needed is clear, concise communication, not necessarily all of the points, but points that get the point across to these communities. There's some major things about to happen that affect them. And I feel we're at a point that that's about to happen without some of the families that are the most vulnerable even knowing what is going on. So the equity concept certainly should carry over not only to the children, but to the families this district basically oversees. So the question is, have other forms of communication been considered? And if they have not, is that something that can be looked at going forward?
Great.
And thank you.
Tina. Thank you.
Okay. Barb Wilson?
Whoops. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Barb.
Hi. A couple things tonight. First of all, I really, and this kind of follows up on Tina's comment as well. I really do believe that there needs to be clear communication, especially when agenda items change. For example, on January 4th, we were told the transportation study was going to be spoken about, and at the facilities meeting before that, it sounded like it was on track. It was on the agenda again for this week, for tonight, and then all of a sudden during the day it disappeared. And I even, even a courtesy last week or last meeting would have been helpful to say why that happened instead of not saying anything about it during the course of the meeting. So in the meantime, I harassed poor Victoria with a ton of questions, trying to figure out what's going on. And if you want, you don't want someone like myself thinking the worst, like, oh my God, tomorrow's the vote, so they don't want the transportation results out there because it might sway the vote, that kind of thing. It would be much better for you to be forthcoming and just make sure that we're informed, especially since there's so many of us that are really following and this is a very important document in our minds, and we're anxiously waiting for its results. The second item that I'd like to bring up also then piggybacks on the first speaker's comments. According to the public meetings laws that are temporarily in effect, you're really supposed to record every meeting, including committee meetings, and publish minutes and post those minutes. And the only meeting that subcommittee meeting for which that's happening, which I appreciate, is the facilities meeting. The other ones, this is not happening. So I'm very familiar with this law. I had given public comment on what needed to happen, and they actually listened to me. So it's my fault that you have to do some recording. But it's the only way that the public can later go in and understand what happened, and because not everyone is available to participate in the meeting during the day or whenever they're held, or maybe I get dropped off with our poor internet service. So just 2 points tonight. It's just all around communication that I think would really help you be more effective in dealing with the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb.
I think that's it.
Great. As always, thank you. Next on the agenda is recommendation to approve minutes of January 4th, 2021. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes? Chip, as second. Amy, any discussion, corrections, comments on those minutes? All those in favor, please say aye or raise
Aye.
your hand. Perfect. Any opposed? Super, thank you. Next on the agenda is to approve the ACSD bills. Chip, over to you.
There are no bills that have been read since the last meeting.
Thank you, that's quick. Next on the agenda is report of the superintendent.
Mary, can I interrupt for a second?
Yes.
Are we not approving the agenda? Because I thought that would be an opportune time to explain the shift or the change in the agenda, not including the transportation study.
Yes. Yeah, I think we should speak to that. Peter, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Sure. So the reason why we had to postpone it was because we didn't have all the information yet. We met with the consultant midweek and kind of talked about kind of how far he had gotten, and he had made some preliminary work, but he was partway there. We waited, which is why we didn't notify anyone. And that's why this morning, after we had looked at what he has thus far and what the board had asked, realized that presenting a partially done presentation on something that's this important didn't make a lot of sense. The reason also that we had pushed to get it on this agenda, in addition to doing the budget, which is a huge lift and is a lot, was in relation to our previous timeline, which had us acting essentially kind of pretty quickly here in January and then into February. So that's why today I sent that email to board members letting you know that I was needing to remove that because he wouldn't have all the information. So I think that's, we will check back in with him again, probably towards the end of this week or early next week, and see if he's there in presenting the multiple options that the board wanted to see in terms of how the boundaries could look and looking at all the data related to that, et cetera.
Great, thank you.
Mary, can I just say one thing? Victoria mentioned approving the agenda. I know that's on the agenda of some other committee meetings, but it's never on this agenda.
Not on our agenda.
No, it hasn't been, no.
So I mentioned that only because I don't think it's something we're not following. It's never on this one.
Right.
It should be, we'll put it on, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but.
Right, my bad. I was, I guess, misremembering that it's
No worries.
the committee meeting when we approve the agenda. I was just trying to insert myself, and that was.
No, and it was perfectly okay, but I just wanted to make sure it was, this, it should be on, it should be. If it shouldn't, then let's not worry about it.
No, but I think given the fact that this was a change and obviously a significant change, it's good to make sure we're all on the same page as to why that changed.
Absolutely.
Mary, at one point in time, we did used to approve these agendas, and I know the Career Center Board, it is always on our agenda to approve the agenda and then take things off or move them around as necessary.
Okay, let's table that one. We can chat about that as a call to order, rather than making that decision right now. But I think for this instance, it was important to comment as to why that agenda item has been changed. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the report of the superintendent.
And my report really is kind of the work of the board tonight. So I would recommend that we move to report of the board.
Okay.
And engage in the budget.
Great. So first up on the report of the board is the high school school choice capacity recommendation.
Great. So historically, and this is something that we do every year at this time, we make a decision about how many slots that we are going to open at our high school. This is part of the statute that allows secondary school choice or transfer between different schools. So if a student at MUHS wants to go to Mount Abe, they can apply. And if there's an open slot at at Mount Abe, they can attend from our residence area. Equally, someone from Rutland Northeast or from Addison Northwest or somewhere else can also transfer into the high school, provided that there are slots open. The statute doesn't provide dollars with students. So when the district takes on other students, they're not receiving additional funds, and they don't count those students as part of their enrollment, nor does it factor into our equalized pupil. So it's it's helpful to other students who want to come attend, but we are, our community is carrying kind of the financial reality of educating those students. Historically, we've set this at 15. We feel like that's an appropriate number given our size and given how many students we have attending generally, on average, attending other schools. Kathy and Justin could probably speak more to how many students over the years attend Mount Abe and Addison Northwest and Otter Valley. Those tend to be the places that our students go to, but generally those numbers are quite low. We tend to max out or get close to maxing out our slots. The other schools do not. Justin, Kathy, do you want to share anything else about that?
I just would add quickly, we're at 14 this year. And like Peter said, we're recommending staying at a max of 15. We will have 4 seniors graduate. 4 of our 14 are this year's senior class who will graduate. So we would, in theory, with your approval, have 5 openings for next year.
And Peter, could you clarify, just so we're all on the same page, especially given the consideration that Weybridge and Ripton are about to go under, how does this number, this process, reflect what they perhaps would have to become part of?
So generally, you're considered in a residency area. So if I live in New Haven, I'm part of Mount Abe, and I transfer out of the Mount Abe school district. depending on, in that example, it's unclear right now if Ripton and or Weybridge secede, where they would belong and where they would transfer out of. So it's hard to say, but what would happen would be, you know, all students have access to this. All high school students have access to this program, but oftentimes in some high schools, the number of slots is far fewer than the number of applicants.
But I guess my question is, do we would foresee that number of 15 being what then current towns are filling, as well as then any additional towns would be able to choose? It would still fall under that 15 number?
If they were not a part of, yeah, if they're coming into, if ACSD was not, or MUHS rather, was not the designated high school, anyone else is having to fill one of those 15, unless, again, you know, in this instance, if a town secedes and then they tuition, that's a totally different story than what we're talking about, which is secondary school choice.
Right.
Not-
And that's
not
what I think
tuition.
we need to make sure folks understand the difference there, which I think
Yeah.
those two things can get conflated.
Yeah, this is solely when you're, you know, whatever district you belong to designates a certain high school. So not a tuitioning town, right? But it designates a certain high school that you kind of quote unquote have to go to. And you decide, I don't want to go to that school, I want to go to a different school. That's where secondary school choice is used.
Great. Thank you for that clarification for folks. I think that's helpful.
Yep.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Maybe this is for Kathy and Justin, but how many students do we have currently who go elsewhere?
I don't have those numbers on the tip of my tongue. I could pull them. Students go elsewhere. Are you asking specifically about choice? We might also have students.
Specifically that would fall into this scenario. I'm just wondering, you know, if we're sending 15 and we're getting 15, then I'm not going to worry about the finances so much. But if we're taking 15 on and none of our students are going elsewhere, you know, maybe I feel a little differently about that.
Victoria, I would say it's about 5-ish.
Yeah, I would agree. I'll try to pull that numbers while our meeting is going on, but it's usually we usually send out a smaller number than we're receiving.
And Peter, do we have a choice? We don't have a choice as to whether or not we participate in this, correct?
I believe everyone participates. We have a choice in terms of how many slots that we open. The law states that you can set parameters around the number of people leaving. So if you're a town that you know, frankly, like has a high school where a lot of your students want to go somewhere else, the law protects a school district from losing all its students. So there is a limit that a school can put on kids leaving. In terms of coming in, it's entirely up to us to decide. And that's why, you know, we've historically done 15. We feel like that 15 number generally isn't increasing, you know, our staffing costs, et cetera. It is something to consider. I did a query last year. So I asked superintendents in the CVSA region, Chittenden County, Addison County, Franklin County, and said, you know, where are you at in terms of number of slots? And after that research that I did, I felt pretty comfortable with 15 here. And it felt like it was on par. And again, it's about your scale, right? It's, you know, a high school of 1,500 opening 15 slots is different than a high school of 500. So given our scale, it seemed like it was in the right place.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just ask, you know, what do we think the financial burden is of an additional 15 kids?
If I pulled the numbers correctly, I think we have six of our students who are in this category at another high school. There was also a question in the chat, are we ever full and do we ever turn students away? And yes, typically my assistant, Deborah, who's been here for a number of years and is familiar with these numbers, said frequently and usually, other than COVID, we actually have a waiting list. And so there are students more than the 15 who are seeking to be with us.
Thank you.
Mary G?
These students who might come in from another district, if they have special services, is that covered by their school district if we have to add on to our student services?
So I think I've been looking into this. I think that you can bill excess cost. Vicky looked like she was shaking her head no a little bit. It doesn't happen that often, but we can bill what's called excess cost, which means costs above and beyond what a general education would be. That's my understanding.
Vicky Wells, do you have any insight on that?
No. We have billed excess costs for tuition students. We have not for choice in the past. We do, I know in a couple of instances, we have paid excess costs for some of our students who have gone under choice for other places. So I think that's a piece that we really need to firm up moving forward with more and more kids wanting choice here.
Right.
Any other questions on this? Great, so I believe we need a motion then to approve the recommendation of allotting 15 slots for school choice. Suzanne? Is that a question or you're the motion?
Motion.
Okay, great. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mary G, super. Any further comment or discussion? All those in favor, say aye, raise your hand. Any opposed? Great. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the annual meeting planning discussion.
So as I look at number 6 under report of the board is adopt school district warnings. And because this is kind of related directly to that, I would suggest that we move this to right before the school district warnings. It kind of flows well into that.
Great. And next on the agenda is to set FY22 announced tuition rates.
Okay, so this part is me. So we're required by statute to set our tuition for the coming year by January 15th, or else the current year tuition remains level. And different schools have different ways of figuring out what they think their announced tuition should be. The thing to know is that the AOE publishes what's called allowable tuition every year for the prior year. So they look at your expenses and they put it in a formula and they say, based on these expenses, this is what you are actually allowed to charge. Would be easier if they told us in advance, but I guess there's no way to know. So essentially, if we've overcharged, we have to refund between if we've overcharged by more than 3%. And if we undercharge, we can bill up between 3 and 10%. So there is a way to recapture that. Historically, our numbers have been pretty close. A couple of years ago, we were able to bill some, but it's not a big revenue generator. We're pretty close. So typically what I would do is I would take the allowable tuition from the prior year and escalate it by like a cost of living adjustment. But I don't have those numbers yet. The AOE hasn't published them. So I'm just using our current year, and I think I recommended that we increase it by 2%. So I recommended you have one tuition for elementary. I recommended 17,120, and then 18,457 for secondary tuition, which is grades 7 through 12. And those are the numbers that I use to calculate our tuition revenue in the budget.
Great. Any questions for Brittany? Chip?
In tuition, these are children that are coming from districts, as we said, if it was Ripton or if it was someone else who was did not have a designated high school and needed to be tuitioned. Those children are then, that's the amount that the town is charged?
That's correct.
Correct, okay.
Jen?
I'm confused. I understand that you're doing this based on prior years. Based on our budget, we're paying $19,500 or so per student. And so I guess I'm confused about why we would charge somebody out of district less money than we are estimating we're paying for each of our students.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll start by saying that that's a good point. I don't actually know any district who charges what they charge for equalized pupils. I think that part of the reason for that is, for example, rolled into our equalized pupils are our special education costs. Well, as we talked about before, if these students incur special education costs, they're billed for that on top of their general education. So there are things built into our equalized pupils that we would bill above and beyond, like transportation. If their IEP called for transportation, we would bill for that. So I think there's a general sentiment that it's not an entirely accurate marker. I also think that it's good to note if it's close to where our ed spending for equalized pupils are, and it is. Our elementary, you know, I haven't calculated this, but I suspect that our elementary costs per pupil is probably lower than a secondary cost. That's why equalized pupils are weighted the way that they are, more for secondary and less for elementary. So it makes sense to have an elementary tuition that's lower than our secondary tuition. So based on the fact that I think it's close, and if we go too high, then we just have to pay it back. Which is probably another reason why people don't just match it to their ed spending per equalized pupil. Our allowable tuition in the years that I've been here has not been the same as our equalized pupils, ed spending per equalized pupils. So kind of a shell game. We'll get the money that we're supposed to get, but a year later, or we'll give it back a year later.
So historically, the approved tuition rates have been lower than our equalized pupil spend.
At least since I've been here, yes.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, could I have then a motion to approve the announced tuition rates as presented by Brittany Gilman?
So moved.
Victoria, and then Chip second. Any further comments or discussion? All those in favor, aye. Raise your hand. Any opposed? Great, thank you. Next on the agenda, ACE budget book and fund balance. Peter.
So you can see in the materials that a draft of the school detail and some of the overall detail is provided here. The budget book, as we've talked about, is something that we work on throughout this process. It becomes our annual report. It's what we share with folks so that they can see both kind of our overall budget and drill down to the extent that we can into our individual schools. We've kind of said from the very beginning when we created our first unified budget that we can't really tell you exactly, because we're not assessing centralized costs to schools anymore. This is more an opportunity to look at things that are unique to a school, but there are lots and lots of other costs that are connected to all of our schools that are not included here. And those are in the centralized budgets that you find in other parts, not the school specific details. So I just wanted to mention that. So we left the last meeting with a lot of conversation around the fund balance and the FY22 budget. So that's one thing that we want to put in front of the board to discuss in relation to this budget. And also just wanted to answer any questions that you all may have after looking at this and anything else with the FY22 budget as well. Brittany, anything you want to add about the budget book?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, as Peter said, this is a short excerpt from the budget book. The budget book itself is, it's probably 75 or 80 pages. It has a lot of detail about trends and historical enrollment and CLA and things like that. And it has a pretty robust financial section, but I did want you to see this level of detail. It's a little more detailed than we presented at the last meeting. One thing that I wanted to note as well is that in the completed version of the budget book, each of these individual school budgets will come with notes. So people know, why is this changing? Because when you start to look at smaller numbers, it can feel a little alarming. Like if you have a $40,000 library budget and it drops $4,000, it's down 10%. And people think, oh, the library's down 10%. Did we cut the librarian? And really somebody just moved from a family to a single health plan. But when you're looking at numbers that size, those variants can look really alarming. So there are no FTE reductions aside from what we've already shared with you. So any reductions that you're seeing are a result of somebody picking a different benefit or their shift between grant and general fund. And all that will be outlined when we present the completed version of this to the community. And the principals have narratives that I've included, which I think are kind of fun to read. So.
Questions for Peter or Brittany? Lorraine?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few, especially like on page 24, which I know you were just saying small numbers can look significant and that there's a reason, but I wondered about the summer school reduction by about a third. Why that was my first question. I mean, I have several.
Okay, so the summer school budget looks like that because we've accounted for some summer school costs in the special education budget. So we broke those out this year because that's really where they come from. So that part is the regular ed piece, and then there's a special ed piece. And previously we showed it as a lump.
Okay, so good. And I also noticed a fairly hefty increase in co-curricular and also not as large, but still athletics. And I wondered about those, especially with our very large overage with our.
So that's largely related to stipends. The stipends that we have are based on a salary schedule. So as our salary schedule increases, the stipends also increase. Also, there are a number of stipends for activities that were previously accounted for under direct instruction. But one thing to note, I should have said this at the beginning, is that we implemented a new chart of accounts for the Agency of Education requirements. So some things that were previously coded in one area have moved to another area. So some of those stipends were coded under direct instruction, but the AOE now says that's really co-curricular. So that's why you're seeing some of that variance.
Okay.
And that chart of accounts was a change that happened statewide, and it also happened in unison with the adoption of eFinance Plus, which is a software program that all districts in Vermont have been required to adopt.
Okay. And the fairly significant decrease, especially in psychological services and also speech language pathology, are those numbers someplace else now?
Yeah, so again, those are reflective of the need that we actually think will incur. Many of those services are accounted for in the special education budget. There's a regular education piece that we keep, but it's really pales in comparison to what we spend in special education. So we're separating that.
Okay, so are you saying there really wasn't a huge decrease? You just moved
No,
that
there was
to
not.
Special ed?
No, there was not a decrease. In fact, we actually had to increase some of our purchase services like OT, which is occupational therapy, and PT, which is physical therapy. But that's largely reflected in the special ed budget.
Okay, and also the quite large increase in guidance, like $35,000. No, not 35, like well, from 1465 to 1840.
Are you looking at the general fund?
Yeah, page
as a
24
whole?
still.
Okay.
I'm still on page 24.
Okay.
Guidance was 1,465,000 and it's jumped to 840,000, 25.64%.
Yep. So let me just get there. Again, so I feel like a broken record. It's a coding thing. So we have a number of contracts with CSAC, which is Counseling Services of Addison County. And in the past, we would code those under direct instruction. Now they are coded under guidance if it's like a behavior intervention type issue. So that accounts for a lot of that. And again, those are based on need. And we do have some of those, many of those contracts actually are not considered special education. They're either regular general education students or students on a 504 plan, which we're still legally required to provide those services, but they're not eligible for reimbursement. So they're captured here.
Okay, and so I don't hog everything. There was one other that I had especially noted on the Weybridge budget, page 53. Administration jumped from 144.5 to 193.9, 34% increase.
Yeah, health insurance. So that's a good example of when someone switches from a single plan to a family plan. It's $20,000 difference, and it makes a big difference in a budget this size.
Okay, but that's like $50,000.
Well, yes, there are other increases built in, but I'm saying that a major contributor to that is health insurance.
Okay.
There are no FTE increases in that area.
Okay, well, that was an admin cost. That wasn't a FTE thing, so.
Right. So included in administration is the principal's office. So there are things like the principal's salary, the administrative assistant or assistants. In this case, there's only one. But also things like postage and printing. Those are all built in there as well. But that's specific to Weybridge.
No, I just know I noticed that quite a large increase compared to some of the others.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Amy.
Brittany, I think it would be really helpful for our public to understand. Can you talk about how some of the site budgets go up, some of them are going down, and is there a correlation between that and where there might be enrollment adjustments, or what are the things that tend to drive that kind of variance? Does that make sense?
Yep. So there's not, enrollment can play a part only in that if there needs to be staffing adjustments as a result of enrollment. The major drivers are wages and benefits and purchase services like contracts for regular education that I talked about before, like CSAC or a student with a 504 plan. In this case, you're seeing some decreases as a result of the FTE reductions that we discussed in the prior meeting related to the 6th grade move. So adjusting the section sizes. So for example, Weybridge is decreasing by 1 section. So that's 1 teacher. So you're going to see a reduction there. So those are the kind of things. And again, those will be in the notes, but wages and benefits are definitely the primary driver. But also some purchase services can be a big impact. So whether a student had them and is no longer here or no longer needs them, or vice versa, a student comes to us or they have a new need.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mary G.
Hi, I'm also looking at some major discrepancies in guidance and nursing services, particularly for Bridport. I see that the nurse is going down by 38.9%. Guidance is going up by 74. But then in Cornwall, the nurse is going up by 65% and guidance is going down by 30. So is there a personnel change there that's driving?
Yeah, so that's those schools all have shared personnel.
Right.
Yeah, so there's one nurse goes between 3 schools, I think, and that
Right.
nurse is also partially grant funded. So some of what you're seeing is just us figuring out how much we can fit in the grant, how much we can't fit in the grant. And then frankly, sometimes the prior year was just a little bit off. So the prior year we budgeted too high. We thought that we weren't going to be able to get money in the grant, but we got money in the grant. So we're reflecting that now.
Okay.
So that's where you're seeing some of those major variances. In some cases, there are personnel changes. A good example of that would be showroom guidance. So there was a personnel change that is the same FTE, but it led to a decrease just because of the wages and benefits that person selected.
Okay,
But
thank you.
that's what you're seeing there.
Okay.
I think also just to add, as Brittany said, the change in the chart of accounts is making this year more challenging. In future years, you will see much less variation once we have that standard and we continue that standard.
Any other questions for Brittany? Suzanne?
I know that people have asked this a couple of times, but can you be as clear as possible for those listening what it means in our budget if we were to ask the town people to allow us to use $500,000 to cover the overage? And then what overage is being kind of crystal balled for the following year that we would have to add the $500,000 to? Does that make sense to you, Brittany?
When you say what does it mean to use $500,000, are you asking about a tax rate implication or what the effect of that would be, like creating the cliff? Do you want me to talk about that? I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, so I mean, if we were to ask to use $500,000 to get us back under the double taxation threshold, what does that then mean next year, knowing that we've borrowed, or I don't know the correct phrase, $500,000 and then, crystal balling it, what additional monies will we then have to make up that could make next year's cliff even worse?
Yeah.
People
So
can
our
understand.
role, sorry, go ahead, Suzanne.
I just want people to understand what the tax implications are as clear as we can show them so that they have a better understanding of what the conversation is.
So when you use fund balance, what we're proposing is using unassigned fund balance, or what we're discussing is using unassigned fund balance. And that unassigned fund balance is not guaranteed year to year. So what can happen if you use fund balance, you basically put it in as a fake revenue, right? Because it's not real revenue. So you're planning to deficit spend and you're planning to eat up that fund balance. It's similar to net income in a private business. So if you took a loss one year, you would be able to, look at your prior year and it would net out, sort of. No. So if you use that as a revenue and you don't have that the following year, it creates a shortfall in revenues essentially. And that increases your education spending and it increases your ed spending per equalized pupil and therefore your tax rate, unless you're able to find other additional revenues or you find savings in expenditures. Our roll-up costs are around 3 or 3.5%. So when you look at a $40 million budget, you can surmise that that's about $1.2 million. So that is sort of what we would just kind of expect to see.
Oh, I lost Brittany there.
I think we all did.
Oh, she's
So
back.
that's the struggle.
So Brittany,
Was I gone?
Yeah, you
we
got
got
for a
you
little
there.
bit.
Well,
We were all
I
holding
sounded,
our breath.
I sounded so good. Well, I was so eloquent. What
So the
part?
1.2 million that you said is the roll-up cost. So is that including of the 500,000 or in addition to?
Well, no, that would be in addition to. That's just sort of what your expenditures, if you look at your expenditures, it goes up around 3%. That's what you're looking at.
Brittany, would it
And
be
then the
safe?
500,000.
Brittany, would it be safe to say
Go ahead,
that
Mary.
one way that we could characterize this is that we're using one-time funds, one-time revenue,
Yes.
i.e. the reserve funds, to take care of costs that are ongoing. And so if
Yes.
we use these one-time funds once, we haven't fixed what's the real need for ongoing increase. That's one concern, right? It's like, okay, I have this pool of money that I only get, access to every now and then. And I have this issue where I have increasing costs, and I'm going to use these special dollars to manage those increasing costs. And then all of a sudden, when I don't have those special dollars anymore, I still have my problem. And now my problem is going to feel bigger because I don't have access to those dollars anymore. Is that a fair summary?
Will actually be bigger, won't it, Mary? Because if you have 1.2 roll-up and then you've already borrowed 500,000, you'd have to add the 1.2 and the
Well,
500,000?
it depends upon how you're thinking about bigger. I mean, at the end of the day, you have a budget here, right?
Yep.
And you're saying my budget is $10, I only have $9. So I'm going to borrow one and now I'm equal. Next year, if I didn't really take care of any additional revenue creation, I'm going to have that $9 again. And now all of a sudden, rather than needing 10, I need 11.
Yeah.
Right?
I think, except in our scenario, the $9 that you need actually also increases.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that is accurate. It is an accurate way to characterize it.
And just,
Peter B.
can I just add to that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we've been clear, like over the years, that to deal with the budget by using fund balance all the time creates we've been talking about a cliff. And I think it's, in general, it's not good practice to not deal with the overages that you have to deal with. Historically, we have used in when we were 8 districts, there were times when some budgets were over and the boards decided to use fund balance. I mean, we're talking about fund balances that were much smaller. We're talking like, $40,000 or something to put towards the budget and then make changes. I think, in looking at what is it going to be next year, and the predicament we're in this year is primarily related to the thing that we're comparing this against. The yardstick is the threshold, right? So the 500,000 and the 1.2 is most meaningful in relation to what happens to the threshold, not unto itself. So that's the part that, again, it's an unknown. We don't know what the threshold's going to do next year, if it's going to go up 3% and enable us to just have an additional $200,000, let's say, to kind of make up with that 500, as opposed to this year where it stayed level, where we'd be looking at 1.7, right?
Yeah.
So,
and just to, the ways that you can deal with this as in the future is you can find more revenues, you can reduce expenditures, or if your focus is on the tax rate, you can hope that the yield goes up. So that's another factor, and we'll talk about that a little later on.
Yeah. Chip.
This isn't really a roll-up budget, though. We have 7 positions that we're not funding because of the 6th grade move. So in actual fact, this is compounded by the hardly any change in the equalized pupil, our limits there, and the fact that we're cutting 7 positions and we're still going to be way over. So that's the really frightening part of it. You can't do that every year and not decimate your teaching staff at some point.
Other comments and questions? Lorraine?
Okay, I guess my frustration is in the past, if we've been over or near being over, boards have asked the administration to come back with some cuts to see what the budget would look like. There's been times when we've said, no, that's way too much. We can't do that. But I really feel like this is the budget that we were presented. The fact that we have this surplus money, I don't feel like you guys made any attempt to go back and do any cutting to try and reduce this. Now, I'm not saying that you should have reduced it by $500,000, but I feel like the attitude is, well, we've got this extra money, so let's just use it, and we'll worry about that extra $500,000 that we're going to put on top of the probably $1 million that we're going to be over next year, and we'll worry about it then. So I guess that's my frustration, that we weren't given, and I'm not saying that you guys didn't look, perhaps you did and said there's just nothing possibly that we can cut to reduce any kind of funding, but I just find it difficult to believe that we couldn't try to reduce this 500,000 somehow. I mean, at least a little, to at least have made an attempt.
Yeah, I think, can I speak to that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we did certainly look at that, and you know, if the board gave us a directive to reduce 500,000 out of the budget, we think we could do that without it being incredibly painstaking. It would put us in a position though where we're cutting from funds that we probably would have to add back to next year. I don't feel, just given the fact that we're hopefully emerging out of COVID, going into FY22, I don't feel comfortable continuing to reduce staffing at this point, just because I think we're going to need all hands on deck with all of the learning needs that we're going to have, with the kind of recovery that we're planning to do. You know, if any year we needed more staff and more supplies and more everything, as we have this year too, and we're hoping to, you know, we don't have an accurate figure yet in terms of what we're getting paid back for from all of the monies we've had to spend during this fiscal year. I guess our feeling is, and again, like, we're totally open to, if that's the board's directive is to go back and find the money, we can do that. My own feeling is, you know, I don't think it's a laissez-faire attitude of, let's just use the $500,000 and not look. It's more just thinking about what our needs are, kind of, again, hopefully post-COVID recovery, needing as many staff as possible, needing as many services as possible, and wanting to kind of like get our feet under us out of this experience. And then again, looking at FY23, where I think we're going to have to come forward with kind of more long-term sustainable thinking around how we approach the 1.2 roll up year upon year, and how we're going to approach that. Again, given the kind of the up and down swings of the threshold, and not being able to say every year we know we're going to get, you know, 3.1%, and it's going to be pegged at 3.1%. The other factor that we haven't talked about as much in this budget cycle is the fact that both state and federal, you know, legislation is coming, working on COVID relief. We don't know how that's going to trickle down to schools. There's a likelihood that schools will see more funding coming in this fiscal year, as we try to kind of get our feet under us. So there could be a boost with that as well. So, I mean, our recommendation is based on kind of all of these things, our lived experience in schools, looking at what students need right now, looking at kind of post-COVID recovery. There's no way we can't, we have to deal with this, but we feel like, given everything on everyone's plates now, that this seems like the responsible thing to do. And we kind of like look to FY23 to really kind of figure out how we approach this, so it's not a year after year of scrambling in January to get under the threshold.
Yeah, I think actually, Peter, that what you were just saying about the COVID and feeling you needing the help this year, that is a persuasive argument to me. I think I really didn't even think about it in that way, so I appreciate you offering that information.
Thank you.
Peter C.
Yeah, I appreciate the explanation as well. The fact is you're charged with bringing forward a budget that you feel is responsible to meet the needs of our students. And we are moving into a year that's going to be pretty complex. And we're still doing it by keeping I went back to look at the last set of documents we had. And, our education spending is still only, we're keeping it at just a little over 1%, a 1% increase. So I continue to feel that while we might be able to find some nickels and dimes in the sofa cushions and perhaps more of that could be done, that's a pretty small increase, given that we have a staffing cost that goes up at least 3% every year just in salaries. So anyway, your job is to bring us what you think is a responsible budget to meet the needs of the students. I think 1% increase in ed spending is pretty responsible. And I think that the proposal for the fund balance is going to be unfortunate to have to do, but probably the responsible thing to do for the taxpayers. Thanks.
Mary, I do have some other documents which may help inform our conversation, but
Yeah, I specifically with regards to the fund balance, correct, Brittany?
well, yeah, and well, how this affects the tax rate.
Yeah, well, I think we should jump into that as well. I just want to make sure from an action perspective, Peter, do we need to do this separately, or we're going to wait?
I think that it's all written out on the warning, so we can walk through the warnings.
Perfect. So then let's continue to go through the materials, and then we'll deal with the warning.
Okay. So on the agenda, there are a few documents under discussion and a few under action.
Yeah.
So they're really kind of all part and parcel with this discussion. I have some multiple tax rate scenarios here. I put it in this format. So first, I had an interaction with a community member, Jenny Phelps from Weybridge. She had asked me to check some of her numbers, and she had sent me a template basically that showed some of the things that you're seeing here. And I asked her if I could use that as a basis for mine, because it's helpful for me to know how this data is viewed by the communities, like somebody on the outside, because I'm so entrenched in it that sometimes I think that what I'm presenting is super clear, and it's not. So I just wanted to say that some of this template was done by Jenny, and she said it was fine for me to use it. So the documents that you have that are kind of a pastel color, and I can share my screen if it becomes helpful.
Brittany, why don't you share your screen so that we're sure everybody's looking at the same stuff?
Color-coded things. Here we go. So this is sort of the pastel color. These are different tax rate scenarios for the town. I guess I should probably start with the district.
Perfect.
Okay, here we go. So here's the district. It's kind of small. The top part in green are the current projections, and you have the left side being property value and the right hand side being income based. So the effect that the budget as it sits with no use of fund balance would have on a $300,000 home and on a couple paying based on income at $80,000. So this calculation, we shared the top part of it last time, but we added the effect down here. And then this blue part is if we were to use the $550,000 of fund balance. So you can see that that would reduce the tax rate increase to closer to 6 cents. And it would, you know, reduce the burden. It becomes more like $200. And then over here on the income side, you can see the difference there as well. And then the bottom part, this orangey yellow part, somebody asked to see last time what the effect of the excess spending threshold penalty had. So if that didn't exist and we still had our same budget with our same equalized pupil numbers, but there was no double taxation, you can see that play out here. And I think it makes a difference of about 3 cents if I'm remembering correctly. So those are the scenarios at the district level. Now at the town level, sorry, I did share this last time, this green part, but I took it a little further and I showed you what it would look like at the town level in the blue part with use of fund balance and then without the excess spending threshold. So that was another question. So we can see that use of fund balance takes a town with an increases of between 12 and 25 cents to between 6 and 18. And then the effect on a $300,000 home. The income-based percentage doesn't change depending on the town. The property value formula does. The information that's really new that I wanted to share with you is that I had a VASBO meeting, that's the Business Managers Association meeting on Friday. And we spoke with the AOE and as business managers, we talked about our budgets and what we're doing. And many business managers and the AOE all indicated that they think it's more likely than not that the yield will not be where it is in the tax commissioner's letter. We've talked about the fact that it rarely is. The past 3 years, I think it's ended up higher than in the tax commissioner's letter, which is helpful to the tax rate. So some business managers, many actually, said that they were using a level yield to project tax rates. I think it's important that you see it both ways because we don't really know. But I also wanted to show you what it looks like with a level yield. So you can see the pretty substantive effect that the yield is having on the tax rate. So here up in green, this is the same exercise, except I did it in bold so I could keep track of bold color, so I could keep track of which was what. So if you look down here under the revised district tax rate, it's more like 8 cents, whereas we were looking at 12 cents with the yield as it was in the tax commissioner's letter. Similarly, if you use fund balance, you're down to it's almost a 3 cent tax increase when you bring it out to 4 digits. But I did the same exercise here that I did before, but with a level yield, so you could see the effects that that had. And then I also, sorry, was I at the, I have too many tabs, guys. I'm really sorry.
No worries.
I'm gonna get there. This is the same at the town level with a level yield. So the difference is quite substantive when you look at the yield and the effect that it's having. So I just wanted you to have that information. Whenever we put out a tax rate, we say that it's an estimate. But I think in this case, the AOE is saying that probably the yield is going to be higher. So I just thought that it would be helpful for you to see it both ways.
And Bree, did they give you any indication with regards to the degree of change in the yield?
So not with certainty, but they did note that one thing that happened is that when the tax commissioner's letter came out and said expected 9 cent tax increase, people started really getting nervous and cutting costs right away. So as costs are lower, the yield can go higher. It's less money that we need to raise. Please go. I'm sorry. I'm alone. I'm alone with the kids tonight. So
Doing a great job.
She's not alone.
please go. I'm serious.
She has a mom.
Go
I
on.
can deal with that.
It's going well. Go. Leave.
It's good that she's concerned about our meeting.
Yeah, she's gonna future finance manager. Okay, I had to mute myself to use my mom voice. So most people think that it will be at least level. The AOE, they're not going to say that with certainty, but they were definitely, the finance people at the AOE were saying that they feel it's low in the tax commissioner's letter. And if you read the letter, he as much says that. He says, absent any intervention, this is what it would be. And I think most people feel that there's going to be intervention. I don't know if Peter C has more information, but what I'm hearing is that the yield that's in the tax commissioner letter feels really low, and a lot of people aren't even using it for their projections. I would feel uncomfortable not showing it to you both ways. I think it's important because I can't make any guarantees, but it definitely makes things feel a bit more manageable.
Great, that's super helpful. Any other questions or comments? Jen?
I'll just comment that I really appreciate how you presented this, and I think it especially helped me personally to understand what it really means with the income sensitivity versus not. I think there's a false perception that you're at a cap every year if you're income sensitive, regardless of the education spending, but this actually is reflecting a higher increase. What you just showed is reflecting a higher increase percentage-wise for income sensitivity compared to the others. And part of it obviously is it's a lower number, so a dollar amount is going to increase at a higher percentage. But I found that really interesting on your last slide there.
Other questions, comments? I thought I saw another hand, but now I've lost it. Chip?
I guess that your last comment, Brittany, was that it's more manageable if the yield is better, so to speak. But does that affect how we do anything right at this point? I mean, does it affect us decide? It doesn't affect any of the numbers that we would use to manage being under or over the
Yep,
threshold.
you're right about that. It doesn't affect our education spending per equalized pupil, and that number is in the warning. And also in the warning is the increase or decrease, but in this case, increase over the prior year.
Right.
So it doesn't affect that, but I think it's for the board to discuss and decide if the implications on the tax rate are such that you're more comfortable without use of fund balance, or that with use of fund balance, it really keeps it affordable for people.
Yeah, there's two ways to look at that there. One is using fund balance, and we get to a point where we're able to do something that, given everything else our communities are dealing with from a financial strain perspective, we can remove the additional burden of seeing a tax increase. Or we can look at the argument that, given the hope that the yield is going to be better than anticipated, the increase is not as drastic, and then therefore the urgency to use that fund balance could be decreased. Those are kind of your two positions. Thoughts or comments? Jen?
Squeaky wheel. I guess just, with that in mind, and, looking at the initial one, the 10.78% increase for the income sensitive without using any help. And being somebody from Salisbury, where our CLA is bizarre right now, I just feel like that's tough. That's, 10, 11% more than that folks will have to pay that probably didn't get a raise this year and probably, may have some employment concerns. So looking at it this way, that concerns me. That nearly 11% increase concerns me. And I'm not sure I'm willing to gamble that the state's going to make that less harmful at this point without any indications, that they're leaning toward that.
Other thoughts, comments? Victoria?
I guess a question first, and that is, well, Mary, you outlined sort of the two options. Is there in fact a third one? Is there a number that we could use between 0 and 500,000 in light of what you heard at your meeting on Friday? I mean, do you think that we could get to the same place with 300,000 if the CL, if we're in a better situation than you thought when we were talking about using the 500,000? I'm not making myself
Yeah,
very
yeah, no, it's not an either or. You could use any amount in between, and I'm happy to mock that up. If seeing the new yield makes you think we'd still like to do something, but maybe don't feel compelled to use as much, less of a cliff, more in reserve funds, then we can look at that too.
I mean, I do think that we should use, personally, I feel like we should use something. I mean, this is taxpayer money that, we've saved. I know we've got plenty of uses going forward for it, and it would be lovely to have it as a cushion, especially for deferred maintenance. But I do feel some responsibility in this tough year to use money that's already been paid to make the tax burden more comfortable for people.
And Brittany, just for clarity's sake, the delta of the $500,000 in change being the portion that is over the spending threshold, that amount, that number, is that how much is that affected by a change in the CLA?
Well, the CLA affects the ultimate tax rate, but the CLA has no impact on the amount that we're over the threshold.
Right. So that's another way to think about it as we're considering what the number is then. Like, are we finding a number that gets us under the threshold? Are we finding a number that gets us to a place where we're more comfortable with the increased tax burden? Or given the consideration of a similar yield, we don't want to go down the route of using reserve funds. Peter C.
Yeah, I always like to think of our tax rate and our spending pre-CLA. We don't have any control over the CLA. It's not dependent on what we do in any way, shape, or form. I think we need to sort of think pre-CLA. And the CLA is really just a measure of property wealth. So if you were at 100%, that means your town would have been reappraised and your property values would be adjusted, and you'd be probably paying more in taxes anyway if your home value went way up. That aside, the amount of money that we're talking about is to get us under the double taxation. And while I really agree with everybody, I don't like to spend one-time money on ongoing costs, it just seems that in terms of bang for the buck, to not only not spend what's over, but to avoid double taxation, it seems that it's a responsible thing to do with the taxpayers' money, and it still leaves us at least some to put into ed reserves as well. So barring a good reason not to, I'm supportive of using the full amount to keep us from entering the double taxation phase.
Other comments from folks or questions? Chip?
I agree with Peter on that. I've never been one to use the fund balances when we've had it for this purpose, but to me, this is a very, very unique, hopefully, unique year. I mean, you know, the threshold stays the same. Our numbers didn't really go down because the state capped them at that area, but we cut 7 positions in this for the 6th grade, and we're still at that place. And there's lots of hurting people around, and in whatever way. And I think that all things taken together, I agree with Peter on that. And I think I've sort of changed my mind from a month ago, but I just feel that it's the responsible part to do it. If we had no fund balance to draw on, well, we'd have to do what Lorraine said, go back and find another $500,000, which is 10 or 12 positions, okay, which isn't going to work. So I agree with Peter Conlon on that.
Other thoughts from folks? Victoria?
I also, when I'm thinking about it, I also have to imagine that next year, the spending threshold will return to its historical increase of between 2% and 3%, which would then help us in lessening the cliff, so to speak. I don't know if Brittany or Peter C. can speak to that as to whether or not that's a risky assumption to take, or if that feels all right to them.
I mean, I think if we looked at, I'm not Peter C, I'm Peter B, but I don't know if you meant me or the other one, but
I meant the other one, but it's okay. You can speak too.
We're, you know, same first name. I think if you look historically, you know, we were surprised this year because we have been quote unquote lulled into thinking that 2 to 3 is what you always get. So I think if we had to predict, we would expect it to go up by 2 or 3%. I also think kind of statewide, to keep it level and inch it up by 0.18 every year is not possible. I mean, it's just not possible for districts to deal with that. So I guess my assumption is either the NEEP goes up, because it's based on a formula, right? It's not just kind of based on the whims of like a committee working on a number. So I would expect it to go up, but how much it will go up, again, I would not want to guess it's going to be 2, maybe 2.5. Like we just don't know. There's so many factors that go into it, and they're all tied to the economy.
I agree. It's very hard to crystal ball what will happen. You know, part of the formula is ADM, and I'm not sure the state has those numbers yet. So it's hard to say. It'd be hard to imagine that it wouldn't return to a 2 or 3%. And there's also a lot of people very concerned about this at the legislative level, and there may be some changes afoot to the better.
Any other comments or questions? Betty?
So this question is not about the budget, but I just wanted to get a few comments from the principals about some of the ways they've been taking advantage of outdoor learning, especially now in the winter. I know that in the fall, there was a lot of outdoor learning. Is that still happening now? And what are some of the ways that you're ensuring that students still get that outdoor learning time? It wasn't very clear in the notes that accompanied the budget. I was just curious to know what you're doing in your school.
Any comments from, Jen? Okay.
Yeah, so hi, sorry. So the 4th grade at Mary Hogan is collaborating with the Fish and Wildlife. And so they're, as part of their kind of an extension of their unit of inquiry, and they're doing tracks and scat outside pretty much every day through January as kind of an example of one thing. They're also going out in the woods for other things. But that's one piece of their learning. The pre-K has been going outside for multiple hours pretty much every day this year. That's just what they do, and as part of learning about the community. And then another example is that, the 5th grade is working on the Good Citizenship Challenge and just did a walking field trip downtown to see different memorials around in downtown Middlebury. So I think people are really trying to take advantage of it as they're able to, and as it pertains to the academics, I think that they're less likely to be out in the tents right now, although it's still possible. I think it's more of being active rather than sitting while outside.
Michael?
So in Shoreham, it's a similar thing. A lot of our outside learning has moved inside. But last year, one of the Shoreham community members, Greg, was taking our kids out after school as an after-school club to do the tracks and scat that Jen had mentioned. And this year we can't have that partnership, but I used to help supervise that. So I've been trying to recreate that by bringing the kids out in different grades, and it really sparks their curiosity. I also want to take a moment and do a shout out to our PE teachers, who we've taken over their gym to put teachers in there who have learning spaces that are too small. So like my reading interventionist is in my gym, my guidance counselor is in the gym because we've made that our cares room for kids who are symptomatic. Our SLP room is too small, so she's in the gym. So Krista Morrison, who's new to join us, has been teaching all of her PE classes outside all the time. And I can tell you the most joyful day I've had this year was right after we got that big snowfall. We have a wonderful sledding hill. And PE class was just how to use the sledding hill in a safe and fun way. Several kids went home and, said best PE class ever. But that also means our PE teachers outside in 10-degree weather all day long on some of our colder days. So hats off.
Thank you, Michael. So Brittany, any other documents that you want us to be referencing or consider?
I did, well, did I? Let's see if it's there. Is the CLA document there?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so I just wanted you guys to have that so you can see the changes in CLA year to year. As Peter C. mentioned, I do think it's most valuable for the board to look at the district tax rate, but it does help understand how changes in the CLA can affect the overall town tax rate. That's all.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks for the discussion. And I think it, again, demonstrates as a board and Brittany, your work with your team and Peter in really being hyper-focused on understanding how all of our actions impact everyone in this district from a tax perspective, and trying to do all we can to balance the two things of providing an amazing education while doing so in a fiscally responsible way. So thank you very much, Brittany, for the work of you and your team on bringing this all together, and for Jenny Phelps for helping to put together a spreadsheet model that gave some clarity to the discussion as well. It's awesome. So thank you. So with this, Peter, do we go to the warning?
Yes, I think it would be helpful to look at the warning, and then and we can also discuss the annual meeting and information we have regarding the annual meeting. And then I think the board could take action on the, if the board's ready to adopt the budget, and make a motion on the fund balance as well. So there are two warnings in the packet. One includes, for Article 3, includes appropriating $623,000 $744 to a capital reserve fund. The other one has the full fund balance to the capital reserve. So that's the conversation we were just having around, should we use the fund balance towards the budget, or should we appropriate all of it into a capital reserve? So those are the two, in terms of when we get to when the board adopts a motion on the fund balance, it will be one of those two. And that's why you've been provided with these two separate warnings that look almost identical otherwise.
So Peter, I'm looking at the documents that are individual in the board pack option,
Yep.
and it's reading warning Australian ballot option 1, and then warning Australian ballot option 2.
Okay.
And you're saying that the usage of the fund balance is in option 1?
Yeah, I'm looking at the original, so I'm not looking at the one that was labeled. Yeah, if Article 3, it's $623,724.
Okay, so option 1 is no use of fund balance to,
Thank you.
to reduce
Okay.
the tax rate.
Great.
So the only difference between those two warnings is the ed spending per equalized pupil will be different if we use the fund balance, and then the amount that we put into capital reserve would be different. So it's Articles 2 and 3.
Great. And the Article 3 representing that number of 623,000 as opposed to the number that we've been looking at with regards to being over in the 500 and whatever, that delta is reflective of what driver?
Well, the delta is
Sorry, go ahead.
You can do it if you want.
I can if you want.
The total amount of unallocated fund balance that we have, or that we're projected to have, is the 1,173,744.
Right.
So in Article 1, the 550 use of fund balance is built into the budget. There's not a separate article to use that 550.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's the difference.
Super. Any other questions on the warning and writing thereof?
So let me, I think this is a good time for me to discuss the annual meeting.
Okay.
Because that pertains to one of the articles on the warning here. There's been a lot of statewide work over the last month or so looking at annual meetings and how to conduct annual meetings. And Sharon and I are actually attending a webinar on Wednesday to discuss the annual meeting that the VSBA is putting on. So we may have more information after that meeting on Wednesday. Our current understanding is the annual meeting will be virtual on the 23rd of February. It will not contain the previous articles. Our old warning, we used to have 4 articles on at the annual meeting, followed by a public information hearing. This year, the public information hearing will be the extent of the virtual meeting. And currently, and the thing that potentially could change, but we haven't gotten word that it's possible yet. So we've added it on the warning in Article 5 is the election of the moderator, treasurer, and clerk. So our current plan is to, unless we hear otherwise from the state, is to include Article 5 on our warning. And Sharon has reached out to our current moderator, treasurer, and clerk to let them know the process to apply for these positions. We're also going to send out information to anyone in the community who's interested in filling one of these 3 positions to get their name on the ballot. And again, Australian ballot, instead of doing it on the floor as we normally do. We're not able to do that this year. That's why the annual meeting will just be the public information hearing where traditionally we have presented the budget.
And Peter, from an operations standpoint, we'll be able to provide the same opportunity for discussion that was provided on the floor during the in-person annual meetings.
We will for the budget and the public information hearing, but the other articles are not on
No, but for the
previous
budget, we'll
ones,
be
but
able,
yeah.
we will for the budget be able to have
Yeah.
that back and forth. Okay, great.
And the other article that is going to move to Australian ballot is Article 1, you can see, to see if the voters will vote to authorize its board of directors to borrow money by issuance of bonds. So that previously was on the annual meeting. That has also moved over to the warning for to be voted on by Australian ballot. So Articles 1 and Articles 5 previously in the annual meeting are now being voted on by Australian ballot on the warning.
That borrowing article is related to it's a tax anticipation note. I just don't, we've been talking about bonds and stuff, so I don't want people to think that this is it's a bond vote. This is just a line of credit that we typically get every year, around $4.5 million that we sometimes use when we're when we have cash flow or
Waiting for tax revenue.
yeah, waiting for tax revenue.
Any questions about this being crystal clear? Chip.
So when you go into the, well, when you get your ballot, if you're doing it, by mail or whatever, or in the voting booth, how many actual ballots will there be? Because normally we have a ballot that talks about the fund balance. I mean, that talks about the budget, and we have a ballot that talks about those people who are running for school board, correct? And we're adding a number of other ballots. I think this has to be clear also through news media and everything else as to what to expect, because obviously all of us are going to be expecting sort of the same, and it isn't going to be the same. So
there's been a lot of communication between our office and the Barrett, our clerk, and town officials. So that the communication around the number of articles and what the ballots look like has been an ongoing conversation for, I think, a couple of weeks. And it sounds to me like it's probably going to be finalized this week.
Okay.
In terms of how it works. I know they were looking at tabulators, and I don't think they were able to procure one, but I think they're feeling like they're getting closer to being ready. But again, it's like a lot of things this year where there's a lot of invention that's happening.
Okay, I appreciate all that. I just want to make sure that, notice of the annual meeting that's online, is it expected to be just basically presenting of the budget rather than everything else, which we will vote on by Australian ballot, period. And however that looks, don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and I think, Chip, that makes a great point. It's just how we communicate this to the community. I think it's going to be great to do it in a way in which we said, this is what you're used to, this is what this is really going to look like, so that they really get a sense of how this process is going to be different for them.
And will there be discussion on each one of the items to inform people who tune in, who will then vote by Australian ballot the next day? Or is the full extent of the meeting just the budget session?
The guidance we got was just to hold the public information hearing from the VSBA. So whether that public information hearing also includes, discussing the different people that are running for moderator and treasurer and clerk, I don't know. So that's something that we'll check into this week in that webinar to see if that's something that would or would not be included in the public information hearing.
And what about for the folks who are running for school board?
School board too.
Yeah, historically, I don't believe they've been included in the annual meeting presentation, right?
No, well, they've had an opportunity to stand up and introduce.
Stand up and make some comments.
Yeah.
If they wanted to.
Yeah, that's something that, again, I'll get more information on, and we can
Okay.
we can see what we're able to do. I don't see any issue with the public information hearing being information about what people are voting on. So I would assume that there would be an avenue for folks to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions on all this?
Maybe just to go back to the fund balance, Brittany, if we decide to warn the article, if we decide to use the 550 to offset, what are we looking at for, what does that leave us with in total in fund reserve?
Yeah, so.
About 2.7.
Okay. He had it on tap. He's ready to rock. 2.7.
2.7. So we're at 2.7 even if we use the 550.
Yeah, so we have, a little over 2 million in total reserve funds now, and then you would be transferring that remaining unallocated, it's 600 and some odd thousand dollars, so.
Great.
That makes me even more comfortable to use the 550.
Any other questions or comments? Betty?
On, I believe it's the second ballot, I'm noticing a different figure for the fund balance. It says 623, 744. I thought we were talking about 500. Could you explain that?
Sure. Sure. So the 550,000 that we're discussing does not have its own article. It's included in the budget and will be voted on as part of the budget. So in all the budget materials, if the board decides to do that, I'll show that clearly that there's a use of fund balance. I'll show it as a revenue. The $623,000 that you're referencing is the remaining unallocated fund balance, and we have to do something with it. And the way that our reserve funds are set up is such that the voters have to approve putting funds into reserve. So that's remaining money. We have to do something with it. It's either got to go into the budget or into a reserve fund. And so that's what that is. Does that make sense? Okay.
Great, thank you.
And you can kind of, the estimate, the 1.173, 744, if you back out the 550 from that, you get the 623 or whatever the actual number is, not 550, but.
Yeah. Jen?
Just your mention of, has to either be in the budget or someplace, right? Capital reserve. In the past, we've used ed reserve, and I'm just wondering where we want to, like, that we're thinking through clearly where we want to put that remaining money, whether it's all of it or less 550. Do we want to put it? We did the healthcare reserve, and you said that should kind of roll into the ed reserve. Do we want to use capital reserve this time around? I feel like in the past we were trying to build up the ed reserve and we weren't still at a level that was recommended at some point.
Yeah, so I apologize because I should have queried the board more about that. You could put it in either, or you could put some in each. There's nothing that restricts us from using the ed fund on capital projects. In fact, the board voted to do some of that last year. Monies in the capital fund have to be spent within, I think, 3 years per statute. And our capital fund is at 0 right now. So based on some discussions that the board had, I had the sense that there was a sentiment that the capital fund was preferred because it sends a message about what we intend to do with those funds. But it can go in either place or a mixture of the two. So that is something that could be discussed.
And I think given the fact that that reserve is at 0 and we know we're pretty clear in looking at the needs of our facilities, that we have a lot of needs that we're not going to be able to meet, that it would be pretty easy to spend those funds. The funds will be needed. So that time frame, I don't think from an expenditure standpoint, it's going to be a problem at all in terms of, it's going to be more thinking about what's the greatest need and how do we serve that need. And I think, as Brittany mentioned, it's helpful if I'm a citizen who's voting on this, and I know it's going into the capital reserve, and we've shared a lot of information around our facilities over the last few years. I think that's helpful too.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so Peter B., from a warning motion perspective, what do we have to do first here?
I think, and Brittany can help me here too, but I think the board should, if the board is ready, to adopt the budget with the numbers in Article 2.
Okay.
And following that, make a motion to, if this is the motion that the board wants to make, either 623,000 or 1.173 to capital reserve. And again, as Brittany said, the other part's built into the budget on the 623. And then I think the third is to adopt the warning as a whole.
Okay, so the first thing is let's get a motion then to adopt the budget.
Yeah.
Do I have anyone who would establish a motion to adopt the budget as presented? Chip, thank you. Second, Amy, thank you. Any comments or discussion? All those in favor of it?
I need to know which version of, so there's the version with fund balance and without, and it matters.
We're just doing the budget right now.
Just the budget.
Just the budget now, then we'll do the warning.
Yeah, but the
equalized pupil cost is different, but I think,
okay.
Do you want
we can
do it together?
I would feel most comfortable because I believe that if we use fund balance, it's part and part, it's a revenue in the budget.
Okay, great. So we have a budget that we're going to adopt. The motion would read to adopt the budget that includes the use of fund balance of the, can you state the number
Mary,
again for me?
Mary,
Yeah.
I think it would be easier if we just, with one vote, adopted whichever warning we're going to adopt, which I assume we're talking about option 2 here of the warnings. And that would, because that would include the number for the budget, the number for the reserve fund.
Great, so we don't have to then separately approve the budget.
Peter, are you okay with going that route? I mean, it sort of does all of that in one vote.
I think it would be better just in terms of the board's adoption to state specifically, the cost, the 40,000, and then, I mean, we can tie them together as Brittany was mentioning.
Yeah, you can I would just read Article 2 out loud for whichever one that you prefer. And that would be your adoption of the budget.
Great.
Okay, then I will make that motion again.
Second again.
Motion is to approve the warning as stated that all shall the voters of Addison Central School District vote to authorize the ACSD School Board to expend $40,352,941, which is the amount of the ACSD School Board has determined to be necessary for ensuring fiscal year. It is estimated that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in education spending of $18,936.57 per equalized pupil. This projected spending per equalized pupil is 0.34% higher than the spending for the current year.
So the motion would probably be something like, we propose a budget with expenditures of $40,352,941 with and then reading the rest as you just did.
Right.
So great. We have Chip who motioned that, and the second was
Me.
Amy. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you all very much. Anything else on this then, Peter?
Yeah, so we still have,
I'll move that we adopt Article 3, which will appropriate $623,744 to the FY 2020 unassigned fund balance.
Great. Do I have a second?
Of that to the capital reserve.
Do I have a second? Victoria? Any discussion on the use of fund balance? Comments? Questions? All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Any opposed? Great, so moved. Nice job, everyone. All right.
so the final piece here is adopting the whole warning. Is there
I'll move
five
that we-
articles?
I move that we adopt the warning that we have labeled as option 2 in the board pack.
Great. Do I have a second?
Second.
Chip, wonderful. All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful. Great job.
Yeah, I think it really needs to be said that this is a tough year. We've had to make some tough choices, but not nearly as tough as the administration has had to make going into this. So this is a budget and decision-making that I think we can really stand behind. Thank you.
Yeah, I would appreciate all of Brittany's work and Peter's work and everybody else that puts their heads together to try to come up with something that's going to be reasonable for the students and the taxpayer too. But appreciate it all, and I appreciate your expertise. You always seem to be able to answer most of our questions, so thank you very much.
And Brittany, given that this is your last budget experience that you will, I know, surely be missing. On behalf of the board, we would like to thank you very much for the work that you have done for the students of ACSD and the way in which you have gone about that work. And so thank you all very, very much. Thank you very, very much from all of us.
Thank you.
12 single parenting, 4 kids at home.
Yeah, I gotta tell you,
It's
answering
like-
budget
it's like-
questions, that's impressive, man.
That's like the dancing with high heels and backwards.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well done. I know on other, we did have one item that I wanted to put out there under other. Peter, we had chatted about some concerns that the board had received as a board-wide letter with regards to the experience that students were having at the middle school, depending upon which team they were on. And we had asked you to take on addressing the concerns of those letters and then update us with how you feel that is going and any changes or adjustments that have been made. So could you provide that update to us?
Sure, yeah. So Andrew and I met and kind of like looked over and talked about some of the concerns, and again, like a lot of the times that we're addressing concerns, we're also talking about them at the same time, and seeing some of the same things. So Andrew and I, before this came forward, have been looking at some of these concerns. We met and Andrew started kind of, I think, in earnest working with staff and others at MUMS to work on. So I've asked him to share a little bit about since he's right at the ground level there working on this, to share a little bit with the board about what he's doing and kind of where things are.
So in response to the letter, a lot of the concerns that were raised were shared by a lot of other parents as well. So in addition to the letter, I had a lot of conversations on phone with affected parents and family members. And also these concerns really affect our teachers and our staff. So it was really an all around collaboration that occurred. And I do want to mention that the parent was super respectful in terms of the letter, but also that continued in our collaboration. So it was really a productive meeting when Peter and I followed up with them in a meeting just prior to break. And so in addition to meeting with other parents and discussing kind of what led to some of those concerns being brought to you, some of the things that are in our control and some of the things that aren't, and then also sharing and processing with them as to what we would be doing. And so working with staff, which included, coming back out of break and looking at systems that we can adjust, taking some of the onus off of students, especially as it regards to attendance, and talking with faculty and staff, including today at our faculty meeting, and then trying to bring the best plan possible and some options to bring to staff this week. We have a school leadership meeting on Wednesday. We have a number of options to consider, and I have them thinking about some other things to bring to that meeting to discuss, because we'd like to make any changes that we want to make. Really, it's a lot easier to implement them at the turn of the quarter. So we're trying to finalize some plans that I think will meet the needs of our students first and foremost, not be too invasive and too much of an adjustment for our staff, because a lot of what we're trying to do is trying to manage our time and try to navigate this system. So following our meeting on Wednesday, I feel like we'll have a lot of these things addressed in there. And if there's any specific questions to any specific concerns, I'm glad to kind of answer them maybe one by one if you'd like. Trying to see any other points that might be relevant. That's it that I have for my notes. I don't know if there's more specifics if you want me to talk about specific complaints or not.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that update. I think at this time, if any board members have any questions or clarifying questions that they want to ask, please let us raise your hand, let me know. Great. Oh, Jen. I'm sorry if I missed that. I thought.
No, I was waiting for others because I feel like I hog time. So thank you for clarifying sort of where you are in the process. I think it's really helpful. And so full disclosure, I am a parent of a middle school student. So I was part of some of these conversations just as a parent, not as a school board member, just trying to compare experiences and what are our kids doing and really what's the expectation. And so, so I feel like for me going forward personally as a parent, just that communication of what is the expectation, right? Because as a parent, I'm hearing, half of my son's friends receive truancy letters. And I'm like, well, and he's like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Am I supposed to do my attendance thing still? And so as a parent, especially with this age range, we have to pick and choose what we get on them about and what we are a little bit easier about. And so it would be super helpful communicating forward, like what do we need to get on them? And so what is the expectation of the students, especially when they're home, and where do you want us to help out, and what should we leave to them? Because we feel like we're doing our job, but then suddenly, oh gosh, maybe we're not, maybe we've missed something huge. So I guess just from my perspective in talking to other parents, that seems to be where some of that disconnect has been.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that too, and thank you for that. A big part of waiting to follow up broadly is to make sure that we have the next plan in place before kind of reaching back up and following up and saying, hey, here's an adjustment we're making, and being very clear, about what the expectations are of the students and how we're kind of making changes that'll kind of speak to this. And then Another part of, in terms of planning, in terms of kind of remedying that idea of, wait a minute, feeling that this was a lot to go back and say, you're not doing your job as parents or students for that matter. In kind of following up when that plan is put out directly to those that was impacted by this, to say, like, here are other things. So people are going to hear directly about ways that we're going to remedy, you know, those letters that were, in this case, you know, and in hindsight, excessive.
Any other questions? Amy,
I mean, not about that, so I don't want to change.
you have
the
another
sub-
other?
I have another other, but
Great.
I want to make sure that with that, we've satisfied the.
Peter B,
We also, we went so beautifully through the other warnings that we forgot the annual meeting warning, which we also need to adopt. It will never end.
the annual meeting warning.
It should be very quick.
I'll move that we adopt the annual meeting warning for February 23rd, 2021, including the virtual annual meeting and public information hearing.
I have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Davina. All those in favor? Any against? So moved.
Nice catch.
Amy,
So I just have a quick question. I know the governor wants students back in schools full-time by April, he sort of said, and then we know the COVID vaccination thing is still unfolding. Do you have any information about whether or not we'd be able to vaccinate our teachers in that time, or what, you know, is there a match in the timetable, or do we have any information on that?
We don't. The reason on Friday that I don't know if you read my Friday update, but I spoke to that and I said, you know, I was in an all-state superintendent's meeting, and at the time of the press conference, and everybody just said, wait, we just heard this from the governor, and no one had heard anything yet in regards to what that plan was based on, you know, in terms of any kind of vaccination plan or supports in place. So right now, you know, we're continuing, and what I stated on Friday was we're just going to continue to get as much information as we can, and as soon as we have anything definitive from the governor or the state, we will share it, and we're going to continue to do what we've been doing, which is working, and go from there. But I guess I was a little surprised. Just that the field, you know, hadn't really heard anything about it yet, and April's not far away.
I think it was later described as aspirational.
Yeah.
any, Victoria, you had your hand up?
It wasn't another, it was a question for Andrew, but if.
Oh, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about sort of, since the middle school has sort of a different structure than other schools in terms of the teams. And I think some of the letters that we read spoke about sort of the discrepancy between the experience. I think most notably it was mostly like logistical things between teams. And I just wondered if you could speak a little bit to sort of the management structure that you have in place at the middle school, and how, you know, going forward, you would hope to have a more, I guess, even experience no matter what team a student is in.
Yeah, one of the key things that very specifically is the organization of things in terms of communication, and knowing that you have this schedule for 5 days a week. And one thing that people really saw from one team versus another was just kind of this one like one team has one document that kind of has their schedule and has the weekly schedule with links embedded in that. It was really appealing, especially to this parent that raised it. Like, why does this team have it? This is something that we want. makes sense, it'd be helpful for students. We had some teams utilizing Google Classroom that is great for many, many things, but that chronological list of things wasn't as simple. So that's one thing that we're looking at for the change of this quarter that I think is really good. I think it's really appealing. We actually really benefited from it just in the last 24 hours. One team that the Phoenix team having to go remote this week, they have just a single document that has all those core classes on it, that has links, has the schedule, has everything that you need right there. That was one of the items that was appealing to this parent and others, and also, you know, me for that matter. And, you know, not wanting to ask teachers to make adjustments midstream during the marking period. It's just something we're processing and kind of giving them a heads up on, and that we plan on that being one of the changes that we're going to address, so that they'll see that change and be hopefully pleased with that. Is a big factor. I think that's to your point.
Thank you. Any others?
I know we talked about just stating whether we're going to be running again this upcoming election. I do plan on running again.
Thank you, Davina. And Peter C's already stated his intention last week. All right, last other I have is I know there are important votes being taken tomorrow in a couple of our communities. And I want to recognize that and the tremendous amount of effort that many people have extended to make sure folks are informed, so that they can make the best decisions for how they are thinking about these issues. But we're step one in the process, and at the end of the day, no matter what happens tomorrow or at the next step, these are still our neighbors and they're still part of our community, and we're going to move forward on this together. And so I just wanted to personally thank everyone for the way in which we have gone about this debate and the way in which we have demonstrated civil discourse, which obviously, given where we are right now, we could all use a little good demonstration of what that looks like. And I think you don't have to look any further than our towns to do so. So thank you all very, very much for that. And we will move forward after tomorrow on that. Any other comments?
I found Peg.
Oh, good.
Sorry, Peg. She emailed me and I didn't check my email till much later. So I feel bad. I just wanted to publicly say I felt bad for keeping her over there for a long time.
All right. So with that, if I could get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Great. Mary, great. Thank you all very, very much. And have a great rest of the evening.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.